So yes, Flint-erestingly Mousterious. I can't claim the rights to that. That was a pun from a student on a dig a long time ago. It's pretty good. And yeah, Mousterious, if you don't know, the Mousterian was one of the key cultures of Neanderthals that was identified. So, Neanderthals, they're celebrities. I'm interested in them. I have been interested for a long time, but it has caught my attention as to why people are still really interested in them after so much time. If you look at Google histories, more people are searching for Neanderthals than they are for human evolution, which is quite striking. And they're all over the media. You know, the media are well aware that people want to read about Neanderthals, and so Neanderthals tend to get a lot more attention. And I don't think it's just that there's a cycle of they're always there so people know about them. I think there's something more. And you know, it's not just that they've been around with us for a long time. We've got, like, you know, so many species of hominins, but they have still kept this sort of aura about them. So I think that's interesting. And I had to put this one in. This is the reconstruction of the Neanderthal from Spee Cave. I think he looks a bit like Daniel Craig, so that's for my celebrity Neanderthals. So yeah, I think part of why, answering this question of why we're still obsessed, you have to go back to when we first encountered them and the history and the social context of that. So it's kind of, it was this turbulent time, you know, as we've sort of had a lot of context of this already in other talks. People were reeling from the idea that the Earth was vastly older than anybody had ever conceived. There was all this uncertainty about our relationship to animals. We were, you know, we'd had maybe a century of real attention on animal fossils, and the idea of transition was really beginning to be there. But still, Neanderthals were like a bomb when they were found, and they just were unexpected, and I think it blew people away at the time. And they were the first hominin that we encountered and understood what it was, that it was an ancient human species. And I think there is something to that. They were our first teenage, you know, encounter with this other species, and they've always been there, and they've been this foil, and that has just carried on right till today. So yeah, that's the unconformity sculpture at Jedburgh, if nobody knows what that is. Cool place to go. So leaping forward to today, our understanding of the Neanderthals is just like light years away from where it was in 1856, when the first fossil was actually taken out of the quarry in Germany. Although it wasn't published in English until a few years after that. But where we are in understanding what they were like and what they did is just, you know, I'd love to see what those early scholars would make of what we do today. It would just be amazing. And they have kind of followed this trajectory of very far away from us, no terrible ape things, and they've just been getting closer and closer and closer, and that's still continuing. And there are interesting questions. Is that because we want them to be close to us? Do we want to find that, or is it actually just that the archaeology has become so much better, the resolution of things we can see is just uncovering more sort of nuances of behaviour, and it's just that we are getting closer to the truth, and that they really were very similar to us. So in terms of just the general aspects of what they could and couldn't do, I won't even go into like things like hunting and eating, because basically they just did everything that contemporary humans did, including plants. And it's more about sort of how much they did or hunted or whatever, but there's no question about they could hunt anything they wanted, basically. The questions about more sort of fuzzy aspects of behaviour, like symbolism, pigment use, all these things, actually, we've got all of that now. Definitely there's use of pigments, there are engraving stuff, there are objects that we cannot see a functional explanation for. For example, I was talking to various people about how they move fossil shells quite significant distances. The one thing that really is remaining, I think that the obvious thing is that we still don't have any sort of art, as in an object that is recognisable. There might be one thing that's kind of nearly there, but that's kind of like there's still a red line, which, you know, it is actually a red line, so the one that's recently been found. So we haven't crossed that yet, really. So I'm just going to whiz you through some of the cool stuff that's ongoing and, you know, where we are. So this is, there's modern in sort of a trend of people going now with all of the amazing techniques and methods that we have and reinvestigating very early discoveries. So this, the top photo is of the first burial that was excavated in 1908. You can see there's a big pit and the stick is where the head was supposed to be. And that has been reinvestigated by a team that published that a few years ago, and they went back and basically redug that site, did all this, you know, the modern stuff to it. There are still arguments about what that site meant, but we now have the tools to actually assess early claims for behaviour with like modern understanding of taphonomy and things like that. So that's really interesting, and it brings what were celebrity finds of their day to sort of modern questions and modern audiences. And this is like a nice scan they did of this pit. It might be natural. They couldn't prove it was or it wasn't, but it's still an interesting site. And there was a whole Neanderthal in there, and that's always the question: do you just find dead Neanderthals by accident, entire skeletons? And when you talk about infants, there's a large number of very complete, very young babies. This is a 2-week-old, I think, from a Russian site, 70,000 years. And it was basically on the floor of a cave under a deep sequence right at the bottom on the floor, and like curled up. And newborn babies don't do that by themselves, so it's like that wasn't just left, that was placed. That's my interpretation, and there's arguments over that as well, but that's not the only very complete, very young individual in sites where all of the other fauna is a mess, you know. And I think that's interesting. This question is about, are they collecting eagle talons? This is kind of all stuff that's been in the headlines. This is one from an Italian site. Some of these things could have some functional aspect to them. They might have been after the tendons, but in other cases, they're not caring how they cut these off, and they're just slicing through the tendons. So there is some aspect that they're interested in the claws as well of large raptors. We've got a selection of objects that are coming through basically from more careful attention to archaeological collections of either engravings or, you know, repeated kind of markings on bones that there's nothing to do with butchery there. And here's another one, and there's like very fine analyses of these that are being done these days. I think you can't quite see it, but there's all these obvious ones, but also there's really tiny little lines here, and you know, that's the scale. They had to be, sorry, there's a scale, so that's 1 centimetre. So it's a really tiny piece of bone. They're paying attention to creating markings. We don't know what for, but there is something going on. And there's another one as well. This just on a, I think this might be on a bear. And it's in a very odd place, nothing to do with butchery again. And you know, there's sequential stuff. So there's something happening. I won't even go into could they make blades. Yeah, they could, no problem. That's always been a marker for modern humans. Nah, you know, that's completely fine. They did that. Could they make things out of bone? Yeah, increasingly we're finding they do. This is a very strange one that's kind of an anomaly from a site in Germany. But we have a lot of other stuff coming through now, again, because people are going back and looking at collections more carefully and with better understanding from experimental work. This is from Gibraltar. This is this engraved thing on a massive piece of the cave floor in Gibraltar, and there's been some argument, oh, is it bear claws? But I don't think it is. I think people are quite accepting that this is something that's created. So that's, you know, that's not a representational thing, but it's of a similar complexity to graphical forms that are regarded as symbolically interesting for contemporary Homo sapiens in South Africa at the same time. And this was one that I think was like a wow thing for a lot of people. This is a site called Bruna Cohen in France that was just published very recently. It's very, very strange. It's like about 300 meters into this cave that you couldn't get in any other way. It would always have been in the dark. And in the middle of this chamber, some Neanderthals of more than 170,000 years ago spent what must have been hours breaking and arranging stalagmites into a circular feature, 2 of them, and then there are these other ones, and all those dots are where there's burning as well, and we don't have a clue what this is about, but we know this is intentional. You know, you wouldn't go and live in there, so yeah, that's interesting. And this is close-ups of some of the stuff. So they were actually constructing. This is balanced on this. Is balanced on this. You know, so there's something strange here. So that's kind of what they're doing. And this is are they making representations or not? This is this new thing that was in the media a lot. Had Neanderthals making art, red pigment around a handprint. That's not drawing a representation, but you are using pigment to create an image there. So the issue with that is that the date puts it at a time when we don't know anyone else in Europe other than Neanderthals, but it's only 50,000 years ago, and actually we might find that modern humans were there a bit earlier than we thought. So that's, you know, some people are still arguing about it, but anyway. So yeah, just a quick whiz through of the changes in the representations. This is a very early one. This is late 19th century, early 20th century. They're looking a bit depressed, although they, you know, have some stuff. They've got rabbits and a bird, so that's actually meeting modern data. And this is some of the more recent ones. They begin to be allowed to smile and, you know, hug each other and look happy. And these are Gibraltar Neanderthals. This is the one at the Neanderthal Museum, Germany. This is sort of showing the modern ideas about pigments and feathers. And I really love these ones by an artist, Tom Bjorklund, who I think captures where we are in thinking about their humanity, and what we want to see is interesting. Just really, really striking images, completely different, actually. But at the same time, although we've had all this profound change in how we think about them, including the discovery in 2010 of the DNA that there was interbreeding, that we weren't sort of separated from them for hundreds of thousands of years. There was multiple interbreeding events. We still sort of have this othering of them, very much so. There's like a combative ways we think about, oh, they're like us, but actually they're not. They're a bit strange, and we're always looking for the things that make us different. And also focusing on the Ice Age aspect that really annoys me all the time. That we always go for that's where the Neanderthals were from, that's what they adapted to. Well, no, they were interglacial as well. And I think that's interesting that we want to exoticize them still. Yes, they did disappear from the fossil record. You can't say they're extinct because possibly half of their genome is still actually around. There is more Neanderthals in genetic terms than ever walked the earth as individuals. But they did disappear. We don't look like them. You know, we amalgamated them, we Borged them, if you want to say it like that. So that's true, but there is this still persistence in this idea of us as a success. There's that word again. Yes, they disappeared, but if you look at actual DNA, genetic evidence, and the archaeological evidence, those early Homo sapiens that came into Eurasia repeatedly went extinct. You know, most of those early lineages have nothing to do with us now. Those groups were replaced or they died out or whatever. So actually, they weren't that successful if you want to look at it like that. And I thought it was interesting about this idea of, you know, when do we notice things? What are we seeing? Are we ready for it? So, for example, the first stone tool that was found with an extinct creature, 1715, it was a mammoth with a hand axe, but in that worldview, they saw that as a Celtic warrior's tool with a Roman elephant. They weren't ready to understand that. They didn't have that context. Even the first fossil Neanderthal, 1856, wasn't actually the first one found. It was the first one that people were in a position to send it off to a specialist and have it look at it, and that's when it was recognised. And at the same time, from 1812 right through to past the discovery of the first fossils, stone tools were being found from sites that we now know were Neanderthal sites, but they didn't have fossils in. So they were finding the tools, but we had no connection between the objects and the makers for quite a long time. And also I think the idea of unknowns is interesting for where we are and what they mean to us. same year that the DNA came out about our connection with them, we also found this hominin X, which came to be known as the Denisovans. We had no idea that that was going to happen. It was just a random piece of bone. We still don't know what they look like. That's, it's just a few bits and teeth. We have some information from the genetics that says very broad things about their hair or their skin, but we have no idea what their faces were like, and I find that really freaky, actually. They were interbreeding with everybody. This is having sex between all these populations is the normal thing, it would appear. And then, like, another bomb that went off, this first generation hybrid, the chances of finding that seem absolutely crazy between a Denisovan and a Neanderthal, that is. And yet, does that actually tell us something about the archaeology, that the chance we would find that seems so small? But is it because there was more interconnection between these populations than we expected, or what? Is it our sampling? Is it because, that it's making us rethink ideas about extinction, about what species, what populations are? Can we use those words? And the big question is, are we going to find a Neanderthal sapiens hybrid? That would be the thing that people would really want. And I think that could be, I don't think anyone would have ever thought that, but we can now think maybe we might find that. I've got to rush through because I'm over my time. Why are they important? Why do we care still? It's about breaking boundaries for us. At the same time as in the 19th century and 18th, that time was stretching, space was stretching as well. What we understood as our place in the universe was kind of, getting completely blown up. And just around the same time that the Neanderthal discoveries were coming, people were turning the massive telescopes, the Leviathan telescope, and going, oh look, that's possibly another sort of, the universe, but another galaxy full of stars. So there's questions about what is our place cosmologically. Neanderthals come right into that and they fit it. And all through this period as well, people start going on about like UFOs. That comes in this early as well. There's this whole link between entities and what that means for what we are. And so actually, here's my Jodie Foster. Neanderthals are aliens in a way. Today, we know that there are gazillions of exoplanets with around other stars. It's kind of like we can only see those because our technology has gone and improved so much. And it's the same with invisible hominin populations like the Denisovans, But the Neanderthals will always be our first encounter, our first contact. Originally in the Pleistocene, when we met them and had babies, raised the babies, who raised the babies? That's the question. And then when we rediscovered them again. And there are, before all this, there were sort of theories, how can we tell if there's been alien contact? Maybe they would have put something in our DNA. Well, it turned out to be true, didn't it? So what do they mean for us? Neanderthals are good for wondering about our own fate as well. The people were doing this way back in the Victorian period, writing sort of stories about Neanderthal skulls in AD 2085, giving talks about what they are, this sort of strange sort of context of Victorians being forced to think far future, and about today, issues about how they survived climate change and also about what we are and who we are now. So I talked about this yesterday, I won't really say much. There is a big issue about what paleoanthropology, archaeology does as a profession. We need to engage with that. I think it's interesting that one of the main people involved in the genetic work doesn't like questions about cloning and stuff, because when his comment is, well, then I have to look like the boring one when I talk about the ethics. But to me, it's like, well, that's central. We should be talking about that, and we're not. And just to finish off, what did the Neanderthals ever do for us? Well, they can help us, actually. This question of archaeology having a dodgy background and how it has been part of colonial projects for the Western society and explaining who we are and why we're better and all of this. That's been going on right through the 20th century. Sort of things that are concerning to people now, the rise of white supremacy in society is significant. And Nazi ideology, it wasn't the Jewish sort of anti-Semitism was a massive focus, but underneath that, there were ideas that human evolution was all about domination and violence and racial groups just having to kill each other. And that was that whole context of the ideas that came out of that. It was this view of what human evolution was and what the Neanderthals were and what our relationship was. And in science fiction, Neanderthals consistently have been depicted as warring with us, like through the earlier 20th century. But everything we know now contradicts those things. And I think we need to actually talk and be a lot louder about that and just not be frightened to say, no, you know, it's all rubbish. And people are directly using sort of Upper Paleolithic sort of claims that, oh, we have a white heritage in Europe going back tens of thousands of years. Well, A, they're nothing to do with you genetically, and B, they were black as well, you know, so as far as we can tell. So, yeah, we need to talk about it more. Here is our future fate. Thank you.